Welcome to Dark Dreams Horror. My name is Lord Gordon Lockett, and I'm here today to present to you 3 true crime stories with an unexpected twist. Apologies for my ghostly appearance, but I died over 100 years ago, so it's hard to look more and more fresh every day. Nevertheless, if you like the stories today, please like and subscribe so we can deliver more horror stories like this for you. In 1913, the bustling streets of New York City were filled with a mixture of old-world immigrants and new-world ambitions. It was a city on the rise, and in the heart of it stood St. Joseph's Church, a place of refuge and solace for the growing German Catholic community. Father Hans Schmidt, with his kind eyes and deep voice, was a respected figure in the parish. Originally from Bavaria, he had quickly become beloved among his congregation for his passionate sermons and dedication to his faith. But the peace that St. Joseph's Church provided would soon be shattered by a grisly discovery that shocked even the hardened New York detectives. In September of that year, the dismembered torso of a woman was found floating in the East River, wrapped in a burlap sack. The gruesome nature of the discovery made headlines across the city. New York was no stranger to crime, but this was different. This was the work of someone truly depraved. Investigators scoured the city for clues, but the case seemed destined for cold storage. It wasn't until they traced a piece of monogrammed linen found with the body that the first break in the case came. The linen was traced to a local priest, Father Hans Schmidt. At first, no one could believe it. The idea that a priest, a man of God, could be involved in such a horrific crime was unthinkable. But as detectives interrogated Schmidt, the facade of the kind-hearted priest began to crumble. Schmidt confessed almost immediately, but the confession was far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. The victim was a young woman named Anna Aumüller, a housekeeper Schmidt had met while working at St. Boniface Church. They had become lovers, and in secret Schmidt had even performed a marriage ceremony for the two of them, an illegal act that violated his vows. When Anna became pregnant, the situation became untenable. Schmidt was a Catholic priest, bound by celibacy, and the prospect of a scandal terrified him. Desperate to maintain his position and terrified of exposure, Schmidt made a monstrous decision. He lured Anna to his apartment, where he killed her, dismembering her body to conceal the evidence. His reasoning was cold and calculated. If Anna and the baby were gone, his secret would die with them. But the investigation didn't end there. As police delved deeper into Schmidt's life, they uncovered a man far darker than the devout priest his parishioners thought they knew. Schmidt was leading a double life. He had a fascination with the occult and had even conducted illegal medical experiments on the side, including forging prescriptions and practicing unauthorized surgeries. There were whispers that he had ties to other unsolved murders in Europe, though nothing was ever proven. In the end, Father Hans Schmidt was convicted of Anna's murder and became the only Catholic priest in US history to be executed for murder. His death in the electric chair marked the end of one of the most shocking and twisted tales of betrayal, a reminder that even those cloaked in faith can harbor the darkest of secrets. The congregation of St. Joseph's never quite recovered from the revelation. How could they have known that the man they trusted with their souls was capable of such evil? It was a betrayal so profound that it shook the foundation of the community. The story of Father Hans Schmidt is not just one of murder, but of the unexpected darkness lurking beneath a trusted figure's holy exterior, a reminder that monsters can hide in the most unexpected places. Linz General Hospital, a massive complex in Vienna, Austria, was the kind of place where patients went to live out their final days in relative peace. The hospital had a good reputation for elderly care. No one blinked when an old man or woman passed away in their sleep or succumbed to the inevitable effects of aging. Death was common here, accepted as a part of life. So, when patients began dying more frequently than usual, no one paid much attention. It was the early 1980s, and over the course of a few months, the elderly wards seemed to be hit with a wave of deaths. The hospital staff attributed the rise in mortality to a particularly harsh flu season, coupled with the natural decline of patients. Elderly patients are fragile after all. Anything could push them toward death. No one had reason to suspect otherwise, but behind the tranquil appearance of peaceful passings, something deeply sinister was happening. A horror hidden in the very place meant to offer comfort and care. Maria, a nurse in her late 20s, was friendly and diligent. She was known for her sweet demeanor, always smiling, always offering kind words to patients and their families. A model nurse, Maria seemed to take great pride in making her patients comfortable, especially the elderly. She'd often sit by their bedside, holding their hands, offering them words of comfort as they slipped away. Her colleagues admired her compassion, but not everyone was convinced that everything was as it seemed. It started with whispers. One of the junior nurses, Hannah, began to notice a disturbing pattern. Patients under Maria's care seemed to die more frequently than others. It wasn't immediately obvious. After all, it was an elderly ward, but Hannah's suspicions grew when she realized that many of the deaths occurred during Maria's night shifts. At first, she brushed off her unease as paranoia. No one could imagine someone like Maria, so gentle and sweet, would ever harm anyone. But then, an alarming number of deaths occurred over just a few nights, all while Maria was working. A shiver of doubt crept through Hannah's mind. She approached a senior doctor with her concerns, who also found the death rates disturbing. Together, they decided to review the hospital records, hoping to find some explanation. What they discovered was chilling. The data showed a staggering spike in deaths on Maria's shifts, far beyond what was statistically normal for the ward. And when they looked closer, they found something even more disturbing. Several patients had been listed as dying from respiratory failure or heart attacks, but in many cases, these diagnoses were made with little investigation. The doctor couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. In a tense staff meeting, the suspicions were finally voiced. The administration decided to investigate further, and the results were shocking. It was found that Maria had been administering lethal doses of drugs, such as morphine and insulin, to her patients. Her victims had no chance, slipping away quietly, without any sign of foul play. The hospital staff were stunned, unable to comprehend that the woman they had admired for her compassion was actually a cold-blooded killer. When confronted, Maria's initial defense was that she had only been helping her patients. She claimed that she had been easing their suffering, helping them die peacefully. But under pressure, Maria revealed a darker motivation. Far from acting out of compassion, she admitted that she had found a kind of thrill in deciding who would live and who would die. For years, she had quietly played God, her angelic exterior masking her true nature, a sadistic murderer. Maria wasn't acting alone. 3 other nurses, her close friends, were involved in what became known as the Lane's Angels of Death. Together, they had killed at least 49 patients, though the true number is suspected to be far higher. For years, they had operated undetected, taking advantage of the trust placed in them as caregivers. They chose their victims based on whims, who annoyed them, who they thought was too much of a burden, who they simply felt like killing. The courtroom was packed when the trial of the Angels of Death began. The public was horrified that these women, nurses, trusted to care for the most vulnerable, had committed such heinous acts. It wasn't just the murders themselves that shocked the nation, but the complete lack of remorse. In chilling detail, Maria described how she and her friends had injected patients with lethal doses, watching as they slipped away into death. In the end, Maria and her accomplices were sentenced to life imprisonment, but the damage was done. The horror of what had happened at Linz General Hospital cast a long shadow over healthcare in Austria. For years, the victims' families struggled with the knowledge that their loved ones hadn't died peacefully, but had been murdered by the very people entrusted with their care. The quiet, sweet nurse with the angelic smile had hidden a monstrous secret. The angel of death had lived among them, unnoticed, unseen, until it was too late. London, 1949. The city was still reeling from the aftermath of World War II, neighborhoods slowly rebuilding, streets still scarred with craters and ruins. Among the wreckage, however, was a seemingly unremarkable house on 10 Rillington Place. The house, like the man who lived there, didn't stand out. It was a cramped, dingy building in a rundown part of Notting Hill. Yet it was here, in this drab setting, that one of Britain's most chilling true crime stories began to unfold. John Christie was the landlord of 10 Rillington Place, a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s with a bald head and round spectacles. He was polite, soft-spoken, and had a faint wheeze that gave him an almost frail appearance. No one in the neighborhood gave him a second thought. A former special constable, he appeared harmless. But within the walls of his home, Christie harbored secrets that would send shivers down even the most hardened spine. It all began with Timothy Evans, a simple man with a low IQ who lived with his wife Beryl and their young daughter Geraldine in the upstairs flat of 10 Rillington Place. By all accounts, Evans was not the brightest bulb, prone to outbursts and fabrications, but he adored his family. However, things took a dark turn in late 1949 when Beryl became pregnant again. Struggling financially and mentally, the couple sought help from Christie, whom they saw as a fatherly figure. Christie told Evans and his wife that he knew how to perform an abortion, which was still illegal in Britain at the time. Beryl, desperate and terrified, agreed to let Christie help. What happened next is a story that shocked the country. Beryl never left 10 Rillington Place alive. Her body was found strangled in the washroom. Worse still, the tiny body of baby Geraldine was also discovered, strangled to death with a piece of cloth. It was a nightmare beyond comprehension. Timothy Evans was quickly arrested after Christie told police that Evans had confessed to him. Overwhelmed and confused, Evans did little to defend himself, eventually signing a confession under pressure. The trial was swift. Timothy Evans was found guilty, and despite public outcry and questions surrounding the investigation, was hanged in March 1950. The newspapers painted Evans as a monster, a man who had brutally murdered his wife and child in a fit of rage. But in the shadow of this tragedy, the real monster was preparing for his next move. For 3 years, Rillington Place remained quiet. Christie continued his life as though nothing had happened. He was still the friendly, if somewhat eccentric, landlord. Neighbors saw him going about his daily routines, grocery shopping, tending to his garden. But inside, Christie was hiding the kind of darkness that would make even the most hardened criminals blanch. In 1952, things began to unravel when Christie's wife, Ethel, vanished. Christie claimed she had gone to visit relatives, but no one had seen her. Then, one by one, other women began disappearing. A homeless woman named Kathleen Maloney, a sex worker named Rita Nelson, another young woman, Hectorina McLennan, who had been staying with Christie temporarily. All vanished without a trace. It wasn't until March 1953, when a new tenant at 10 Rillington Place was looking to install a shelf, that the horrific truth began to surface. In the kitchen alcove, behind layers of wallpaper and dust, the tenant discovered something that would make even seasoned policemen pale. Human remains, multiple bodies, all strangled, all hidden carefully by the man who had been living among them for years. Christie had been systematically murdering women, including his own wife, for years. He would lure them into his home under the guise of help or kindness, often using his experience as a former constable to gain their trust. He would then gas them into unconsciousness, using his faulty kitchen gas pipes, before strangling them and hiding their bodies. The extent of Christie's depravity was beyond imagination. When police began investigating Christie's home, they found the bodies of at least 6 women, but it was clear that this was only the tip of the iceberg. The sheer cruelty of the murders was horrifying. Christie confessed to all of them, showing no remorse, only a cold, calculating desire to detail how he had fooled everyone for so long. But what truly sent a chill through the veins of the British public was the revelation that Timothy Evans, the man who had been executed for the murders of his wife and daughter, had been innocent all along. Christie had murdered Beryl Evans during the botched abortion attempt, then strangled little Geraldine to cover his tracks. He had framed Evans, knowing that the simple-minded man wouldn't be able to defend himself against the accusations. The nation was horrified by this twist. How had Christie, a man already guilty of multiple murders, managed to fool the courts, the police, and the public into believing that Evans was the killer? The answer lay in Christie's unassuming nature. He had been invisible, hiding in plain sight, presenting himself as a weak, soft-spoken figure, when in reality he was a cunning, manipulative psychopath. Christie was arrested and put on trial, but this time there would be no escape. His calm demeanor throughout the trial only added to the sense of unease surrounding his crimes. How could such a quiet, mild-mannered man commit such atrocities? On July 15, 1953, Christie was hanged for his crimes. Yet the story didn't end there. The wrongful execution of Timothy Evans led to a major public outcry, and was one of the key cases that eventually led to the abolition of the death penalty in Britain. It was a bitter irony that Evans's death, so cruelly orchestrated by Christie, would become the catalyst for reform in the British justice system. The house at 10 Rillington Place was eventually torn down, but its legacy lingers. The horrors that took place within its walls, and the terrifying twist that revealed how a seemingly mild-mannered man could manipulate the system to such a degree, remain one of the most haunting true crime stories in British history. And the final horror. Christie had never appeared to be a threat. He was the kind of man you'd nod at in the street, maybe share a cup of tea with. He was hiding in plain sight all along, a demon with the face of an ordinary man,